Hello folks, here welcome to my channel. Today I will continue on how to test React application or testing React component, a stateless or a stateful component. On previous video we learned how to test a stateless component, and on this video we are going to learn how to test a stateful component. And as I mentioned also in previous video or tutorials, that we're using this small React app to help us to test React components, different React components, stateful and stateless. And this, as I mentioned also previously, is just very simple form where it has 3 input here to add first name, last name. When you fill this 3 input, then should be showing this disabled. This is now disabled button, then it will enable this button. As you see here, after filling this reason, will enable this button, and when I press here, will show this user here, and then it will empty this form and disable the button again. And we created the simple test for stateless component on previous tutorial, and if you didn't watch that tutorial, try to go back and watch that and then try to follow us in this tutorial. And also, if you are new to my channel, don't forget to press subscribe button and enable the bell to get all new videos when I upload them to the channel. And also, if you have any question, any comment, leave that on the comment section, and if you like the content, to try to press thumb up, and that will support me to continue and uploading more videos and tutorial. So let's go directly to the code and find out how to do this stateless or stateful component, which will be more fun than stateless component. Basically, maybe you don't have an idea what is stateful and stateless. So stateless, when we don't use a state on the component, it will be just a dummy component or a functional component, a component that doesn't have a state. So the state will not be changed from like A to B. And stateful, which will be the opposite. Basically, a component has a state, but has a list of states that changing from initial to different state, for example from 1 to 2 or from 0 to 1 and all other different states. I hope that make it more simple and clear for you. So let's go to the code. And here, this is the code that we just worked on last tutorial. And today, last tutorial, we work up with this form component and also user component. And this tutorial, we are going to move from component directory to container directory. And on this container, we have this container here. And so this will be stateful, as I mentioned. And I'm using hooks to just separate out all the state and functionality and complex scenario to one file, and I'm calling this file here, call it hooks. And here this is when I centralize all the hooks or the component or state that I have, then to make the container more simpler and more clear to understand and reading the code, and also to help me to test it. So I am importing this function here, then I can access users and also handle change, handle submit. So what I can test on this actually, so if I can come back here to this hook here, we have initial state. We can make sure check the initial state have this like a list of key here and data. And also we can test when we call this handle change, so we can update the user instead of empty, should adding new user. And also we can test when call this handle submit to update the user to be empty. If you remember that earlier, when after filling the form and pressing the button, it will add the user here, but it will empty this form again. So which is this function will make sure to empty the form and also to update the user or list of users that will display them here. So this list of user will be an array, so which is here. And also we can test the initial list of user to be empty array. When we call handle submit, then updates this list of users. So this test cases we are gonna to add. Let me just, I'm going to empty anything here, and I'm going to bring code to speed up this tutorial, and I will explain this line by line and how we can create our test file name, for example. And so it will be dependent on the file that you need to create a test for. For example, we are going to create a test for this hook file. So basically will be called hooks.test.js. Let me just add this code here. So this is the test cases that we are going to add for this file, and we need to import this React hook and also act from the testing library / React hook. And as I mentioned, we need to install this package. I mentioned this on the beginning of the tutorial, and if you didn't watch that. And also we need to import the React hook itself. We have it here, so we can import it from hooks, which you call use dashboard. If I come back to these hooks, here we have this function called use dashboard. We need to import it. We have it, and then we need to create this describe. Will be a wrapper for all test cases for this use task hook. And let's start. Let's just comment all this. Let me start with the first test case. So the first test case, we need to check should set initial user to empty strings. So how we can check this one? We need to just first to create const to access result. It will be equal to these render hooks, and inside render hooks will be callback function, and inside here we can call this use dashboard, and this will be called as a function. And we need to expect the initial user to have empty string. So where we can find the user, we can find it inside this result. Basically this result will be result dot current and dot user to equal let's create initial user const initial user. This will be an object with the initial user. Let me check the initial user, how it will be look like, what it will be looking for. These users, if I go back to these hooks, and this is the initial user. Basically we can copy all this set of these keys and come back to our test file and add them here. So the initial user will have this first name, last name, emails, ID, all of them are empty. And we'll expect the initial user just to check, just to make sure always is empty. For example, if accidentally someone came and tried to add something, and not to break our application. So again, npm run test, this will run all test cases for this project, and I mentioned this previously, and this test script will be on package.json. And if you didn't watch the previous tutorial, I will advise you to go back to watch the introduction for this React app testing, and also the previous tutorial about how to test a stateless component, which has more things that will help you to understand what's going on here. And here our test is failing. Basically we need to first, so we need to ignore other test cases. For example, test file, these two here are passing. We need to only to test this file. How to run only specific one file for test? You need to call npm run test, then the file directory name, which is source containers slash dashboard slash hook dot test.js. If I hit this one, this will run all the tests for this file, which we are working on now. So the issue here is complaining because this result actually it will be inside destructuring. It will be destructuring like this. So usually it will be, for example, data will be data, then here will be data dot result dot current dot user, and if I run this one, then should be the test pass. As you see here, the test is passing, and usually the convenient way, we don't call this data, we're just destructuring it to result directly, and we can just remove this data and destructuring this to be result. And again, if we run this again, should be passing. And also we're showing you why we test this actually empty field. For example, accidentally if someone came and tried to add the initial first name to be, for example, Mo, if I run the test now, will fail. So this will help us to make sure always the initial test or the initial state for the user to be empty. As you see, is expecting the first name to be empty but received more, and that our test now is working. Always make sure your test is fail and then should pass, and if pass, also try to make sure is fail. And now this test case is passed. Let's go to next one. Next one, we need to check the initial users to be empty array. And also this again similar to this one, we can copy this one and just modify it. We call results from and then use this render hooks to render this use dashboard hook, and we'll pass this. We don't need here again actually to pass this. We don't need to create this initial user, so we need to check here result.current.users in this time instead of user to be empty array. If I save this and try to run the test cases, so this should pass. As you see, this pass. Also we need to make sure this should fail if I change it to curly braces instead of array. And let's see, this should fail. If it didn't fail, then we have something wrong. Okay, that is failing. It is expecting a curly braces but received array bracket or a square bracket. So let's just change it back, and this now is work fine. Let's go to next test case. So the next test case here, what we need to do, should update user data when call handle change. This which more complex scenario here. So previous two scenario was a little bit simpler. This handle one, how we can work around this again will be similar, something similar to this one. And first we need to actually access this result by calling render hooks, then passing our hooks as a callback. And now we need to access this function called handle change, and we can calling it. And to call this function, we need to call this act will be a wrapper for that function after this line, and this will be as a callback function inside here. And open curly braces, then we can call the handle change function. So inside here, then dot handle change. And this handle change, let's find out if this handle change will expect any param or not. If I come back to this file here and look for handle change, see this handle change will expect an event. E here just stand for event, and then this event has a target, and this target has name and has value. Let's create this and pass it down to this function. Let's come back again here. Again, let's create costs. Let's call it just even equal to curly braces, and this will be have a target, and this target will have name, and the value will be, for example, more. And if I just try to pass the event here to the handle change, and as you see, if we read the description, should update user data when call handle change. So because here we adding this first name, we need to check, actually we can check instead of users, let's see, here will be user dot first name to be this here more. And instead of this, we can actually create a variable here, call it value, and value to be more. And instead to just remove duplication here, this following best practice. And then here instead of this like text, we can just pass that variable. Whatever you can change the value will be matching the value here. And if I run the test, should pass, unless if we forget something. So again, oh, here we are, so our test is pass. But for example, if we said it will expect to access to get, for example, Ali, it should fail. Also, as I mentioned, we need to check always to make sure our test to fail. And here we are, so expected Ali, we received more, so that now our test is failing. And then if we change it again to the value, then should pass. And here, this next test case was working fine, and we get it done. So the next test case here, we need to also enable here should add user data and user ID to users when call handle submit. So if I come back again here to these hooks, and when we calling this handle submit, we'll expect this user will be added to users. Let's see, this user here to be added to these users, and also this list of user data to be added also as this user ID to them. And how we can do that, and as we mentioned on previous test case here, we can update the user data when calling this handle change. We need first to do the same. Basically, we need to make sure the user has enough data and then call the handle submit. First step, what we'll do, basically, I'm going to change this to be just directly more the value, and I'm going to remove this value from here, and I'm going to duplicate this for 4 times. And this actually event, not even this event, this will be last name, and this will be email. You need only 3 events, and email will be b@b.com. last name will be Duina, and we need to duplicate this 3 times, and it will be for example event. First one, let's call it event 1, and second one event 3, and third one event 3, and again here event 1, 2, 3 to differentiate between them. So first we call this, and now we can check the users or the user. We can console log actually here. You can console log the user has data first to make sure has the data. Let me just comment out this line and run the test. This will just showing us the user with this data should have this data, and with empty ID that seems not having this new data. This should be act for each call actually, and we need to remove this and remove this one and remove this, and then let's try again and check the values for the user. The user should be updated with this new value, and instead of empty to be has a values. As you see, we have more, and we have Duena and email, and the ID is empty. And next step, we need to have additional call here for handle submit. Instead of handle change, we'll be calling this handle submit, and we need to change this to be handle submit, and this will expect event, and this event will be different. Let's see what it will expect it from the event. If I come back to handle submit, see we using this event to use this to access this prevent default. And let me just remove this console log, and again let me come back here and create this event const, and the event curly braces, and this object has this key called prevent default, and it's going to be a function, and we are going to use jest function, and then that will fix or help us to pass it down here. And when we calling this, then we are expecting the users instead of user, this array to equal an array, and this array including an object with this data, which will be expect dot object containing this data, which will be first name Mo, last name Duena, and with email will be b@b.com, and also with an ID. But let me first run the test, and let's see what the test will tell us. And let's be running the test, and I will recap again this one because, as I mentioned, this is more complex than others. And the test is passed actually, but let's also check it should fail. Basically should be .co.uk. Let me check this one. Is it gonna to fail or not? If didn't fail, then there's something wrong. Okay, that is failing. Absolutely is right. That's right. So basically now again, if I just change it back again to .com, so yeah, it's containing an object with this 3 key and also with an ID. If I pass the ID to be empty, and let's go to next last scenario here. And before last scenario, let's just recap this quickly what we are happening here. So we test when we call handle submit to update users, which will be an array with array of user, and the user will be an object has 3 key: first name, last name, and email, and the fourth key is going to be the user ID, and which will be just called ID, actually not user ID. And how that is happening: first we calling this render hooks, and we use dashboard hook, and we created here initial 3 events, and every time we call handle change, imagine this will be just similar when you add here first name, last name, email, and we update that. So this will be this first scenario for the first name, last name, email, and then when we press the button submit, then we'll call this handle submit. When we press this, then we'll call this handle submit. At the end, we need to check this users array to have this object with this data, and this user data will be just displayed here after press the submit button, which will be all the step or the scenarios that we just going through. And the last test case here, if we just enable this one and set initial user to empty string when call handle submit. Okay, this will be similar to this one. For example, if I just try copy the same actually scenario here, and yes, I'm going to modify that, don't get panic, and I need to check the user instead of users, this to be this curly braces. Let me just remove everything here to equal this curly braces, and instead of this data I need to make sure it's empty after press handle submit. User, not users. So basically I can continue with the same approach with the same data, but I need to check the user to be empty after calling this. And if I run it against the test case here we are. That's the 5th test case now is passing. How we know this one? If I come back to hook here, see, we calling this set user with empty first name, last name, email, and ID. And for example, if someone accidentally came here and tried just to add hello world, for example, then we try to run the test case, should the test fail? And that's why we have the test, to make sure our code always is efficient, and so should be work as we expect. As you see, is failing, is expected to be empty, but we receive this hello world, and we can just remove that one and clear it and run it again. And that should be the test for stateful component, which try to go through one by one. I hope that was clear, was useful, and if you learned something, try to leave your comment down and tell me what you learned. And if you like it, even try to press thumb up, and also tell me you like the content, so that will support me to continue uploading more tutorials and more content. And if you are new to my channel, try to press subscribe button and enable the bell to get all new videos when I upload them to the channel. That's all for this stateful component. On the next tutorial, we're going to work around mock, how to mock. For example, as I mentioned, now we try to access here on this test case here, if we need to mock the ID to be actual ID that here we're using the date, and how we can mock the date and getting a value for like mocked or using guest mock. And yes, thank you for watching, and see you on very next tutorial.